إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكرى وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أاتخذوا من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعلمون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون الله
محمد وآل محمد صلوات रे होए हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा हुआ अर्शे बरी पे पुकारा रे हुए हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा जोर हैदर का जिसके बदन में हाय बेसर किया उसको बन में तिश्ना लबों गया रंग में मारा रे हुए हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा बना बनकर वो नौशाह लुटा है कुंबा हैदर का रन में काटा है था जो उनका गर्दिश में सितारा रे हुए हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा शिमर कहता था काटूंगा मैं सर मानो बयात मेरी इब्ने हैदर शह पे खंजर चलाया दुधारा रे होए। हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। ज़ैनब खैमे से उस वक्त पुकारी, भाई हो गई बहन तुम पे वारी। वाली कोई न रहा हमारा रे होए। हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। रो रो करती थी खालिक से फरियाद, दे तू बरे खुदाया मेरी दाद। शिमर लूटा है खैमा हमारा रे होए। हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। रो रो फिजा से कहती थी सकीना, हाय वीरा हुआ है मदीना। बाबा जन्नत को तेरा सिदारा रे होए। हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। हुआ अर्श परी पे पुकारा रे होए। हाय रे मुस्लिम के प्यारों को मारा। मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु रहमल्लाहु मय्यक रसूल मुबारकतुल फातिहा।
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين، شفيع المذنبين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة، ادفع بالتي هي أحسن، فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم، وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا، وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. There is no doubt that it's due to His kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And then we send our condolences to our living Imam and to each and every one of you as we gather this evening to commemorate the Istishhad anniversary of the children of Hazrat Muslim bin Aqil alayhim as-salam, Muhammad and Ibrahim. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when we look at these examples of these young boys, these young men, we can say, that insha'Allah ta'ala we become as loyal to our Imam as they were to their Imam, insha'Allah. We have been discussing the subject of pardoning and forgiving, al-afu. And we have two more today and on Monday to try and wrap up the discussion, insha'Allah. But it's an important subject that helps us in our akhlaq and how to conduct ourselves with other people. If you look at akhlaq is all about how we behave with others, right? Islam, as we've said time and time again, is not a religion which promotes solitary confinement of ourselves. Rather, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to be part of the community, to be out in public. And in those times when we are out amongst people, there's no doubt that we're going to be tested, as everyone is different and people have their own expectations. And everyone has their own emotions when they come into any particular conversation or dialogue. And so the onus is on each and every one of us, right, on how we behave. And this is what akhlaq is, right, how we behave with others. I remember, it's an important thing to constantly keep in mind that escalation of any conflict is on the person who responds, right? Is based on the person who responds. It's not based on the person who begins that confrontation. Because when someone begins a confrontation with us, we have choices at that time. I can either respond back with the like, I can be even more aggressive, or I can choose not to behave in that way. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us always to be of that type of person who pardons and forgives and does not respond with the like or worse. So we've touched upon this subject over two lectures, and the most important things that we have to remember as we progress today is that al-afu, or pardoning, is one of the characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves within human beings. He considers that to be a noble characteristic. And when we look at the seerah of the Anbiya or the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we find that pardoning is a major characteristic that they have. They forgive people, they pardon people, and they do not retaliate. When we talk about pardoning, what does that mean, right? And again, just as a form of reminder, pardoning means that I don't seek vengeance for what has happened to me, right? I don't want to get back at you. It doesn't mean that I don't let my feelings get known. That means if someone hurts me, it doesn't mean that I just say, okay, fine, I'm not going to let them know that they have hurt me. We can let them know that I've been hurt, that I am not happy with what has happened. But generally, as human beings, we have a desire then to get back at them because of what they made me feel like. So we want them to taste what we experienced. And that's where Allah promotes pardoning. He says there's no need to get into that type of vengeance or revenge back at people. However, as we said, studies have shown, and we are our own experts in this, that vengeance feels good. Yeah? To get back at someone, to have revenge, even if it is of a minor victory for me, will actually make a person feel happy temporarily until the repercussions of that vengeance comes back on us. And when you see how we behave with others, we know that seeking vengeance is bad, even though it may feel good. So for example, if my child is bullied, I will tell my child there's no point to get back at them. Let's leave it, right? And so even in that scenario, I am teaching my child that vengeance is not good. So even we who recognize that there is certain satisfaction that comes from vengeance, when we are dealing with others, we will try to counsel them in a manner to not seek vengeance. If your spouse, for example, has been hurt by somebody, we will try to make them look at the brighter side of it rather than say, get back at them, right? Inshallah, that's what we do, right? Because if we are the type of spouse who says, yeah, get back at them, then we're a bad spouse, okay? A quality of a good spouse is that they make their spouses see the positive in other things, not the negative of what has happened. The problem is that I can do this for other people because I'm not walking in those shoes at that moment, right? So I can tell others to forgive. I can tell others to forget. I can tell others to pardon. But whenever I'm the one who's hurt, that pardoning is very difficult, right? That forgiving is very difficult, and seeking that vengeance is what we like to do. And so in today's lecture, what we're going to be talking about are just 3 simple points about what we can do to let go of this anger that is often developed within us when people harm us, when people hurt us. What are the steps that we can take to learn to pardon people? And again, I'm repeating, and I will repeat this over the course of this lecture many times, that pardoning doesn't mean I forget what has happened, right? Because once I forget, I'll make that same mistake again. Pardoning doesn't mean that I don't inform them of how I feel. It just means that I don't seek vengeance, right, for what has happened to me. I don't do a scenario of tit for tat, as we call it, right? So there are certain things that we are told by the experts of akhlaq that we can practically do in our lives when we are hurt by someone or some things. And again, these are things that we all get hurt, right? We're all on different emotional spheres. And so sometimes, even when you come home and let's say you are in a jolly or joking mood, you may joke with your spouse or you may joke with your child, but your child or spouse may have gone through a very tough day, so they're not at that same emotional level as you, and so they may take offense at how you are joking. This is part of our regular cycle of life, alaykum salam, where we are offending others, but we have to learn how to let this go. So there are 3 things that we'll talk about. The first thing of how to learn to pardon or forgive others is, number 1, we have to recognize the benefits of pardoning, right? We have to forcefully remind ourselves that there is benefit to pardoning people and to pardoning others. And this is true for any positive akhlaqi characteristic. There is tremendous benefit in that. Now that benefit may not be immediate. It may require me to swallow a very tough pill right now. But the long-term benefit of that is something that we cannot deny. But we have to remind ourselves, right? It reminds me of some people who are, for example, when they're ill or when the doctors tell them that, you know what, you need to go on a specific diet, and when they're eating food that doesn't taste well, the only way they can get through that is by reminding themselves of the benefits of this particular diet, right? Likewise, when we are in a state of spiritual anxiety, we have to remind ourselves of the benefits of pardoning others. And so when we look at the benefits, there are both spiritual benefits and that there are health benefits. The spiritual benefits are the benefits that will benefit us in the hereafter. And we get this very beautiful hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And he's reported to have said, إِذَا عَنَّتْ لَكُمْ غَضْبَةٌ فَأْدَرُوهَا بِالْعَفُوِ. He says that if you are overcome or faced with anger, avert it through pardoning. Avert it, right? So you are angry, tell yourself, I'm going to let this go, right? Letting it go doesn't make us weak. You understand that, right? Though society tells us it makes us weak, it doesn't make us weak. Letting go doesn't mean that we're letting the other person have the upper hand. I keep reminding these points because these are the doubts that come into my head when I'm saying it. And I'm sure if they're coming into my head, they're coming into your heads as well. That it doesn't mean that you're giving them the upper hand or the green light to constantly bother you. That's not what it means. What it means is you are not going to let that anger ruin who you are. right? And so you're letting that go by pardoning it. So Allah, oftentimes, I guess, wa alaikum salam, one of the ways we understand pardoning then is that you are pardoning that anger from yourself, not that you're letting it go with the other person as such. So I hope that that idea makes sense, right? So the Prophet says that if you are ever overcome or faced with anger, avert it through pardoning. Because innahu yunadi munadin yawm al-qiyamah, because a caller will call out on the day of judgment, and he will say, man kana lahu ala Allahi ajrun falyaqum. He says, if anybody has a claim of reward from Allah, then please stand. Now imagine, this is a claim of reward, right? So it's like that Monopoly piece where you get 200 because you have to get 200, right? You have to get a reward from Allah. That means, I don't think there's much we can do in our lives where you can claim a reward from God, you know? But here, this is one of the things where he says that a caller will call out and say that whoever has a claim for a reward from Allah should stand up. فَلَا يَقُومُ إِلَّا الْعَافُونَ, that none will stand except for those who are pardoners, who pardon others. Yeah? None will stand except for those who pardon others. Alam tasma'u qawlahu ta'ala. Have you not heard Allah say, فَمَنْ عَفَى وَاصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Those who pardon and those who conciliate, yeah, who make things better amongst people, their reward lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is tremendous amount of spiritual benefit attached to it. That you swallow this pill of anger, you don't revert back with any type of revenge or vengeance, with that full understanding that by doing so, you will claim a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that reward will no doubt be better than whatever material satisfaction you'll get for being angry at someone or seeking vengeance from someone. Those are the spiritual benefits, right? And there are probably many, many more than that. But there are also immediate benefits to learning not to hold on to anger. And some of them are about health benefits. Study has shown that forgiving others and pardoning others and letting go of that internal anger can lead to drastically improved health. Just Google this, right? That benefits of forgiving others or benefits of pardoning others. And they list all of these health benefits that have scientifically been proven from not having that fire constantly burning within you and that anger constantly overwhelming you. So some of the benefits that are mentioned are improved mental health, right? Because you don't have this constant anxiety. Part of that anxiety that will eventually lead to an anxiety disorder is that I can't let go of what has happened to me. And I keep replaying these things in my mind that are actually making my body suffer, my mind suffer, lack of sleep. Other things that would help with, other things that are beneficial from a health perspective are less stress and hostility towards others. When I'm not angry, I am less hostile, right? I am more fun to be around. Lower blood pressure, strong immune system, improved heart health, improved self-esteem. And if you look at this, are just like some of the points that I found worthy of mentioning. There are many more health benefits, but then it makes a lot of sense when we look, for example, at traditions from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala wa ali Muhammad, where he says, "Man kathura afwuhu mudda fi umrihi." Subhanallah. He says that whoever pardons a lot will gain an excess in lifespan. Right? And then we think about that, right? Like so at one time we may have thought that this is like a spiritual gift that God gives because you have done something good. When in reality, if you think about it from this lens of health, that when you don't have all of these health issues, naturally your lifespan would become more better. It will become longer, right? Not just longer, but of good health. And even if you look at it from that lens, because it's hard just to say the spiritual lens. The spiritual lens and the spiritual and the physical do have a connection with one another, right? So even when we look at those things that talk about if you cut off ties with your family, your lifespan shortens. If you look at it from a health perspective as well, if you have a healthy and loving family, naturally you have less anxiety and less stress in your lives, and therefore it will create in turn a healthier and longer life for individuals to live by. So these are just some of the benefits that we have to remind ourselves of constantly when we are faced with anger or anxiety. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So number one, how do I let go of this fire of anger within me by and pardoning others? I have to remind myself of the benefits, right? It's not rocket science what I'm about to tell you. We should know these things, but it's a reminder. Consider it as a form of reminder. I have to remind myself of the benefits. And like I said, we do this with a lot of things. When our iman is not solid yet, we pray because we remind ourselves of the benefits, right? We fast because we remind ourselves of the benefits, or remind ourselves of the possible wrath, right? So if I don't fast, Allah will punish me. That's the same motivation as this. Why should I pardon? Because there are some specific benefits that are attached to it. Now, the second point that will help us in this journey is that we need to take some practical steps to let go of our anger. Anger is a characteristic that we are all born with, right? If you remember, there are faculties of the soul that we all have, and this is a discussion in akhlaq that we had about 8 years ago, I recall, that we're all born with certain innate faculties, meaning Allah has created us this. We have the faculty of desire. That's why we're desirous for things, right? There's the faculty of intellect that we have. And part of it is we have the faculty of anger, right? We're born with this. Now, when we are created with these faculties, it's because these faculties are meant to be used for God. So we get angry over the things that God is angered with. But what happens during the course of our lives is that I use that anger for myself and not for God. So I get angry at the wrong things, right? So I have to learn how to let go of that anger. And so the first thing that's part of that is I have to remind myself that this anger that I feel at other people being mean to me, at other people not being nice to me, is only harming myself, right? My anger is not harming the person who harmed me. There's no benefit to that whatsoever. And I'm the one who's losing sleep. I'm the one who's losing weight. I'm the one who's constantly angry. I'm the one who's constantly upset when the person who has done these things to me is not feeling any of my frustration. So there is no point to the anger. And this again, alaikum salam, is something that we do need to remind ourselves of all the time, that there is no point to this anger, that what good is that anger. Now, that's not automatically going to shut off your anger, right? But at least it's a good reminder to do that. Well, we touched upon this, that part of, a lot of times our frustrations, like when we're busy during the course of the day, we may not be reflecting about our anxiety and anger all the time. It's only when the mind is idle that these things will begin to once again conjure themselves up, right? So a lot of times this would happen to us at night when we're about to go to sleep, and then these thoughts once again begin to cycle through our heads. And it is at these times, when we have to physically stop these thoughts from taking place. So part of that is, part of the techniques that are described for letting go of these problems is that we would actually have to get up out of bed and make a list of what is upsetting us, right? And then mentally and with your physical eyes, look at that list to see whether there's anything you can do about that at this particular moment, right? And your brain has to recognize that you're right, I can't do anything about this right now. I can't do anything about this right now. And what begins to happen is that your brain shuts these things off and you're able to relax at that time. Part of that is this anger. What benefit is this anger having right now, right? And you have to remind yourself of that. The second way that's part of shutting off this anger and learning to forgive and pardon others is that we need to recognize who is the source of my anger. Who is the source of my anger? And depending on who the source of the anger is, there are different expectations that we have, right? So let's go through some examples. The first example would be anger, something that a total stranger did to me. A total stranger on the road cut me off. A total stranger said a nasty word to me on the street. A grocery clerk was rude to me, right? Whatever it is, someone honked at me, it upset me, whatever it is, when the source of your anger is a total stranger, there's no doubt that it will have an effect on your health, on your human body. You'll feel a knot in your stomach, for example. But anger from a total stranger deserves no time of allowing it to fester. We have to be mentally strong enough for that, to say that this was a waste of time. There's nothing I can do about it. It's not like you can go find who this stranger is, and even if you do, it's not going to help you in any way. Oftentimes people who act aggressively towards others, when they are later approached, they regret their act of aggression. So even if you were to go back and find the person who upset you, who's a total stranger, they would regret doing what they did because they also impulsively acted, right? There was a case like this. I don't remember the specifics, but someone at a Tim Hortons yelled at a customer for being a foreigner or something like that. And then when they were later interviewed, because he was caught on camera, they said, I had a mental slip up, right? And so sometimes what happens is that when we have a chance encounter with someone who upsets us or angers us, we can't take that personally, because in a very high likelihood that person just had a mental slip up at that moment, right? And so there's no point to waste time over somebody who had a mental slip up or who had something that happened to them on accident. So when I'm frustrated or angry, or I am filled with anxiety or tension, if the source of that is something that someone who's a stranger did to me, man, I gotta let that go. Okay, there's no easy way, there's no other way. I just gotta let that go. That's not worth my time of being frustrated, right? Now, what if the person is a loved one? Now this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, right? If someone who you are constantly around, let's say it's your spouse, let's say it's your child, let's say it's your parents, let's say it's your in-laws, let's say it's, but it's someone that you love who has done something that is wrong, who has hurt you, or who time and time again hurts you, right? What is the approach that we need to take with these type of people? And in these scenarios, especially if it's a loved one that you will have to deal with on a frequent basis, vengeance serves no purpose at that moment. Logically, vengeance serves no purpose. They did this to you, so I'm going to do this back to them. They did this to me, so I'm going to do this back to them. With the person you're going to encounter all the time, seeking revenge is actually counterintuitive, right? And the way to actually mend that relationship is through pardoning. Now again, pardoning with the full breadth of definition that we have given to pardoning. What that means is that I let it be known that I'm not happy with what has happened, but I do it in a manner which displays my akhlaq. So it doesn't display a lack of akhlaq, rudeness. Even today at Fajr we were talking about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar and the laws of that and the ahkam of that. And Sayyid Sistani, may Allah give him a long life of health, inshaAllah, he says that the way it needs to be done is you need to be mindful of the status of the person you are doing it to. So you don't do Amr bil Ma'ruf the same way to a 70-year-old that you would do to a 7-year-old. There's different ways of talking and addressing people. And so if it's a loved one, I have to let it be known that I am not happy with what has happened. And on top of that, that I am going to not seek any form of vengeance for what has happened to me. That means, for example, You know, it could be like simple things. So let's say your husband ran late from work and he didn't text you to let you know that he was running late from work, and that upsets you, right? So when your husband comes back from work, there's nothing wrong with letting your husband know that, hey, I was worried and I'd appreciate just a short text message that I was running late. That's totally cool, right? That's part of that process. Where it would be where I'm seeking vengeance is that next time I'm running late, I'm not going to text you. Why? Because remember, you didn't text me, right? Now that form of get back at me is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want, right? Now this is a very benign example, right? But sometimes these things happen in a much grander scale where I'll give you the silent treatment, I'll give you this, I'll do that, or whatever it is that we would do. But the point is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want that. Now, it also doesn't mean that, for example, from the perspective of children, that I will not reprimand their behavior. No, if reprimanding of a behavior is necessary in that particular instance, then I have to reprimand their behavior. I have to correct their behavior, but it also means then that I don't bring it up every time. So remember that time you did, remember Yachi, remember? No, if you've already reprimanded and if you've already let them know that you're not happy with what has happened, then you don't continuously remind. So it's more difficult when it comes with a loved one, there is no doubt, because you're encountering them all the time. But the expectation is always to pardon. Seeking vengeance is never going to solve any problems with loved ones, right? And there's a very beautiful hadith regarding this from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. In his wasiyah, or in his will to his son, he says, إِذَا اسْتَحَقَّ أَحَدٌ مِّنْهُمْ ذَنْبًا, that if anyone deserves punishment for a sin that they have committed, فَأَحْسِنْ الْعَذَلِ, then censure gracefully. فَأَحْسِنْ. That means censure means what? Like tell them that, hey, this was wrong, right? But Imam alayhi salam says, do it gracefully. Do it in a way where there is not going to be resentment for being told that what you did was wrong, right? There is a way to reprimand someone. There is a way to correct someone. Yelling doesn't work, and I know yelling is just the automatic response for us sometimes, right? But yelling doesn't work, and we all struggle with that. I totally understand. Sometimes our kids know how to push the right buttons, you know what I mean? But yelling doesn't solve anything at that time. Imam says censure gracefully. فَإِنَّ الْعَذَلْ مَعَ الْعَفُوِ, because censure accompanied with pardoning, listen to what the Imam says, censure accompanied with pardoning, ashaddu, is more beneficial, it is more severe or more effective, min ad-darbi, it is more effective than striking or hitting. Yeah? Censure plus pardoning is more effective than hitting or striking, liman kana lahu aqal, for the one who has an intellect. Right? For the one who has an intellect. And this is where it gets really more interesting, right? That means we're talking about for people who are reasonable, right? For people who are reasonable, by you not resorting to revenge, it will have a stronger impact on them, because they'll be able to see, like, wow, look at how, right? Now, what if they're not reasonable, right? Now, if they're not reasonable, then what good is that anger in the first place? You're wasting your time again. In either scenario, it serves no purpose. You understand, right? And so when we're hoping we're dealing with reasonable people, especially if we're considering we're talking about loved ones, but even if they're not reasonable, then you're truly wasting your time by being angry, right? And so we have to learn to pardon and forgive. What if the person is someone who's just ignorant, right? You take a white nationalist who doesn't like brown people and he's just yelling at me. He's ignorant, right? The Imams faced this all the time. They faced this all the time. they never responded back with the like. Never. They never resorted back because they recognized that they were ignorant. And this is where the verse of Allah kicks in. And He says, وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ, that goodness and evil are not equal with one another. إِدْفَعْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Always, he said, always repel evil with that which is the best, right? Best. Not even repel evil with goodness. Repel evil with that which is the best of conduct. Why? Because if the animosity is there, it will melt away from them as if you were best friends or as if you were close companions. But then, of course, he says, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. He says, but none can do this except for those who have sabr. Yeah? Like He knows us so beautifully, right? It's not easy when you're being yelled at, when you're being mistreated, for you just to not resort back. It takes a lot of steadfastness to do that. And so we look, right, at all of these scenarios, even if someone is an oppressor and who's just trying to to dominate you with everything that they can. If you can get out of that situation, get out of that situation. But if you can't get out of that situation, what good is plotting revenge when you know you can't carry that revenge out, first of all? What good is that, right? And when you look at the Imams, they all lived under Taghut, all of them, right? And they all showed us the way that we have to conduct ourselves. When the situation requires, they helped. When it didn't, they just avoided whatever they were doing and they lived their own lives. By identifying the source of my anger, I can formulate a plan of how to pardon and forgive. Y'all follow what's happening here? Yeah? It requires us to be reflective. If we're not reflective and we're just responsive, always responding, it serves no purpose. Right? If it's my child who's angering me, if it's my mother who's angering me, if it's my wife who's angering me, you have to look at that particular scenario and figure out what's the best plan. Because there's no cookie cutter answer for all of these things. So that's number two. Number one, we said we got to remind ourselves of the benefits. Number two, we said we have to learn the source of the anger and try to figure out what's the action plan that we have to take. The last thing that we are told is we need to practice relaxation techniques. Right? We don't take time to relax in our day-to-day lives, unfortunately. And so we're compounding anger. We go to sleep angry, we wake up angry, and then we're just angry, and we're just upset, and we're just continues day after day. There are things that we should be doing, right? Like reading the Quran more often. Man, we don't take advantage of God's words. We really don't, right? If I'm angry today and I read the Holy Quran, the chances are I'm not going to feel better right away. I'll be very honest with you. It's not. But if I do it every single day, then yes, the Quran will be an outlet for me. I can't expect God just to be like a magic trick and just be like, Ya Allah, make me feel better. That doesn't work that way. You've ignored Him for so many years, now you want Him to help you like that? But if we do it consistently, pick up God's book consistently, read a page a day, then when we are feeling down, we are feeling angry, those words will have a tremendous impact on what we have or what we're feeling. Read a dua, but then go take a walk. Go take a walk. Enjoy what God has done. 30 minutes of fresh air can have a tremendous impact. Exercise, right? Meditate. There are so many things that we can do. Talk to someone, right? All of these things will help put into perspective that this frustration that I have of how I'm being treated has no effect on me. And inshallah, when we do all of these things, pardoning will become a lot easier. There's one more section that I want to talk about, but we will do it on Monday when we celebrate Mubahila, and that should encapsulate this entire discussion, are people that we cannot pardon. Right? So right now we've talked about pardoning and in the overall essence of what is pardoning. But there are certain situations when pardoning is not, it can't work. Right? It can't work. And we have been guided with that by the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we're gathered to commemorate the istishhad of two young boys, two young men who had accompanied, according to certain riwayat, had accompanied their father, Muslim bin Aqil, to Kufa. And some tell us that Muslim instructed his two boys to go and send a letter to Imam al-Hussein informing him that it is not right for him to come to Kufa. And these riwayat tell us that they were captured by the guards of Ibn Ziyad and imprisoned. And Muslim ibn Aqil became shaheed. Karbala happened. And for an entire year, these boys stayed in a prison. It is said that after spending a year in prison, one day they decided to make their identities known to the guards who were guarding them. So one night, they began speaking to one of the guards and they said to him, Ya Shaykh, Hal ta'arifu Muhammad bin Abdullah? He says, Ya Shaykh, have you heard the name Muhammad bin Abdullah? He responded, of course, that is our Prophet, that is Rasulullah, how can we not know him? He says, Ya Shaykh, Hal ta'arifu Ali ibn Abi Talib? He said, have you heard of the name Ali ibn Abi Talib? He says, of course we have heard of Ali. Ali used to govern from Kufa. He says, Ya Shaykh, فَنَحْنُ مِنْ إِتْرَةِ نَبِيِّكَ مُحَمَّدٍ وَنَحْنُ مِنْ وُلْدِ Muslim ibn Aqil. He says, Ya Shaykh, we are from the progeny of Muhammad bin Abdullah. We are the children of Muslim ibn Aqil. We are told when the guard identified or found out who these two children were, he devised a plan to allow them to escape from that prison. But I say to you, my brothers and sisters, that they were freed from the prisons of Kufa. But these two young boys were gharib in the state of Kufa. They had nowhere to go on the streets of Kufa. And so they began to roam the streets with guards of Ibn Ziyad everywhere. We are told they ended up by the river Euphrates. That is where they decided to spend their time. A lady came by and she saw these two boys, and so she brought them to her house. But she said, I beg you, please be quiet. Please do not make noise, for my husband works for Ibn Ziyad and he is part of the guards of Ibn Ziyad. It is said these two young boys, Muhammad and Ibrahim, they spent that night in the house of this lady. They did their ibadat and then they went to sleep, and then both awoke, began to cry. Muhammad looks at Ibrahim, Ibrahim looks at Muhammad, and they both said that we just saw our father in our dreams and he was saying to us that they are waiting for us to come. Both the boys begin to cry. Both the boys begin to console one another. And we are told it is this time that this Mal'oon Harith, who hears the cries coming from his house, and then he finds these two young boys. And then look at what he does. He ties them around a pillar and he keeps them as prisoners in his house until the morning, when he takes them by the riverbed and he unsheaths his sword, and then he tells his slave to kill them. But the slave says, I will not harm these young boys. And then he tells his son, and his son as well says, I will not harm these boys, until Harith himself says, then I will do it. And then these two young boys look at Harith and says, Ya Shaykh, take us to the market and sell us. You will get a high price for us. He says, no, Allah, I will not do that. He says, then take me to Ibn Ziyad yourself. He says, no, I will take your heads to Ibn Ziyad. And then when they knew that there was no outlet for them, they said, then allow us a moment to recite a 2 rakat salah. It is said they prayed a 2 rakat salah, and then they raised their hands and said, Inna lillah وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Ya Allah, we are coming to you soon. Please give our mother courage when she hears the news of our Shahadat. فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ والعاقبة للمتقين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم يا حسين.
मोहम्मद इब्राहिम मुए जब नौजरिया पर मोहम्मद इब्राहिम मुए जब नौजरिया पर मोहम्मद इब्राहिम सबा कहियो ये अम्मू से के हम तेरे हुए फिजिए सबा कहियो ये अम्मू से के हम तेरे हुए फिजियो कटा खेलो यूं है हमरा से मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब दोनों दरिया पर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब पर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम हमारी लो खबर जल्दी के हम है खुद को राही हमारी लो खबर जल्दी के है हम खुद को राही खरे हम जो है मुझसे मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब जो दरिया पर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब जो दरिया पर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम तुम्हारे फर्ज से ऐशा हमें है दुआ इतना तुम्हारे फर्ज से ऐशा हमें है दुआ इतना मिले हम बाप से जाकर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम मुए जब नौजरिया पर मोहम्मद और इब्राहिम करबलाए करबलाए करबो बला करबलाए करबलाए करबो बला करबलाए करबलाए करबो बला करबलाए करबला करबो बला खून ना हक बहा करबो बला वो खून इमाम खून पाक खून मुस्तफा खून खून ना हक बहा करबो बला वो खून इमाम खून पाक खून मुस्तफा रोज कयामत पे तू रहना गवाह ऐ करबला ऐ नैनवा ऐ शाते फुरात करबला ऐ करबला ऐ करबला बलाए करबलाए करबो बला करबलाए वो बला राह करबला है आका हुसैन जान साथी नहीं बहुत साथ चंद अजीजा राह करबला चले है आका हुसैन जान साथी नहीं बहुत साथ चंद अजीजान ऐसी आया नजदीक है माह मुहर्रम माह अज़ा माह हुसैन इब्न मुर्तज़ा करबला ए करबला करबला करबो बला करबलाए करबलाए करबो बला इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन वसयअलम الذين ظلموا أي من قريبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سورة البقرة الفاتحة دعاء شفاء المريض وغفر بلاه اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 توجه. السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر الأهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين وقاسم بن الحسن ومسلم بن أخير وهاني بن أولوى وحبيب بن فظاهر والهر الشهيد السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولى وابن مولى السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن مولانا علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدي في يوم الجزاء وفقنا الله لزيارتك يا مولاه ورزقنا الله شفاعتك في الدنيا والآخرة وعلى أختك فاطمة المعصومة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الأسر والزمان الأمان 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 السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا شريف القرآن السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأكثر فرجهم